Okay, nobody's actually in the chat yet, but welcome! Anybody who might be watching the the VOD of this in the future to something that I've sort of been putting off for quite a while now. Oh yeah, hey, there are people here now. Welcome to something that I've been wanting to do for a little while, and that's, make another go of streaming a little more often. Just gonna give it a minute or two to make sure everything is going well. You gotta remember, guys, that there's a delay on this, so when I say no one is in the chat, yeah, you're hearing me from about 45 seconds ago. Now there are people in the chat. Alright, we got 10 people, that's enough. Now, I see people are asking me, like, have you ever thought about doing Jak and Daxter? And probably after the stream, I might do a little bit of a Q&A session and answer other questions, but generally, I want this stream to be focused on the game that I'm actually playing, or at least the series I'm actually playing. I'm kind of hoping that people might go back and watch these at a later date, and and have something to look into. So let's go ahead and get into that. Well, I say 45 seconds. Mainly thinking of Twitch. I don't know. I don't actually know what it is on YouTube. Let's see how the stream health is doing. My video looks like it's cutting out a little bit. Focused on the game, that's a good one. Yeah, I know, right? Okay, I'm just gonna let the demo run for a second here. Are the sound levels okay? Does everything look good on your guys' end? Somebody is saying, why not treat Sonic 3 and Knuckles as one game? Well, normally I do. But this is a very special occasion, albeit I'm getting a late start on it, but 23 years ago today, Sonic and Knuckles specifically was released in North America. I have live streamed Sonic R before, Emilio. And I also saw somebody ask if I'm going to do Sonic Advance. Yeah, that's going to be part of next season. It's probably going to be like one video covering the whole trilogy. But yeah, that'll be next season. Okay, then let's go ahead and get started. I alluded to this a little bit in my episode on Sonic 3, and apologies, by the way, if I repeat anything that I said there. That was about 3 years ago now. Or more than 3 years ago, actually, jeez. Let's go with Knuckles. I think that'll be appropriate. This game, Sonic and Knuckles specifically, was a pretty big deal to me, because it was the first time I can ever remember a piece of, like, really any piece of media pretty much, being something that I was hyped for and looking forward to before it came out. I have this really vivid memory of being in, I think, a Hills. I don't think those stores even exist anymore. And being in the video game section and seeing, like, one of those floor displays with that iconic, it's what I used for the thumbnail for this video, that iconic black Sonic and Knuckles poster with that stylized logo, along with a date, October 18th, 1994. And, being that I was 6 years old at the time, in my memory, the time between when I saw that and when the game actually came out feels to me like it was about 6 or 7 months, although I know that doesn't make any sense. It couldn't have been more than a couple weeks away. But man, I was looking forward to this one. Didn't know anything about it. We were still about a year away from getting AOL at that point. And, again, I was 6 years old, so I don't know how good I would have been about looking up anything about it. But I just remember being really hyped more than anything that I was going to get to play as Knuckles. I remember playing Sonic 3 back in the summer of '94, and again, like I looked up information on like news groups in later years, and it was very well known even before this game came out what it was going to be and what it was, and even some details of its development in relation to Sonic 3. But again, I had absolutely no way of knowing any of that. All I knew is that it was going to be a new Sonic game, and I could assume based on the title that Knuckles would be a playable character. But playing Sonic 3 back before this game came out, you know, of course I would notice all those little areas that I couldn't figure out how to get to. And I remember thinking, but maybe that's, you know, this is Knuckles' island, maybe he's the one who, like, understands how to get around there. And maybe that's what he's using to stay one step ahead of Sonic. And then, of course, this happened, and I felt like a little bit of a genius. But again, after what felt to me like 6 or 7 months, this game finally came out. I actually the day before this game was supposed to be released, my mom happened to stop by a Kmart on the way home from work, and you know, street dates back then. Video game release dates were still sort of taken as a suggestion and weren't really honored specifically by all retailers back then. So they already had it out for sale. So I remember her surprising me with this game a day early. And man, it's just crazy how vivid that still is in my memory of how excited I was and you know, just opening the package for the first time and seeing the completely unexpected shape of the cartridge, for one thing. Because, of course, it had the flap on top to allow you to lock on other Genesis games. That's, you know, lock-on technology. But again, in relation to me having no information at the time, I had no idea about that. So, I guess because I was so excited for this, I looked at it, like, I saw that cartridge, and I was like, well, this game must be so advanced and spectacular that, like, that's probably like an air vent that they had to put on top of the cartridge so that it wouldn't overheat, because that's how awesome it is. My mom worked with PCs, specifically, like, installing, like, tax software for a lot of businesses, especially local businesses in the 90s. Because, you know, that's when computers were kind of becoming more and more ubiquitous for business. So I had an idea about, like, overheating and about, like, cooling vents, because all those old beige PCs had that. So I guess that's where I got that from. And then, of course, I would start it up and I would start playing, and then my dad read the instruction manual, was like, you can put on other games, and that just blew my freaking mind. It's just an experience that I could never have now, because I would know everything about, you know, I would know this stuff about a game well before it ever happens. But like I said, the primary thing I was excited about for this game was the ability to play as Knuckles and see what he could do and see what he was going to be like. But the problem was, like, I had such a limited framework of experience with games back then. Like, if they didn't work within the boundaries of what little I'd experienced, I got really confused. Like, I don't think I'd ever seen a game have a character selection on the title screen. Like, that's how early this was for me. So, when I first booted it up, I remember I completely missed the fact that, that you could even select Knuckles from the title screen. I'm pretty sure the first thing I said upon starting Mushroom Hill Zone was like, "Oh man, you mean it's just that Sonic saves Knuckles?" I had a lot to learn, clearly. And I apologize if I will get to the chat shortly. I'm just waxing nostalgic on the day I got this game. So yeah, it was a really, really important sort of formative experience for me, I think. And I think that's why I've been inclined to play it today. And let's see, this is a good opportunity to look at what the chat's saying. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, then, like, trying to time them but during level transitions or score tallies or something would probably be a good time to do it. Although, given the delay on the stream, I guess I guess I might miss them as well. But that's okay. I haven't decided if I'm going for the Chaos Emeralds this time. I guess I'm not, since if I was, I'd have gotten a lot more in Mushroom Hill. Although, to be honest, the Sonic and Knuckles half of the game is kind of... I'm a little bit... I don't want to say rustier because I play it all the time. In terms of where the special rings are, I'm a little... I don't know it nearly as well as I do the Sonic 3 half. Because I guess partly because it's very rare that I play these games separate from each other. When I was young, I thought Knuckles was brainwashed, and when Eggman zaps him at Hidden Palace, he starts remembering who he was. Yeah, stuff like that. Just like these, like, video games of this era usually did so little to like convey what was going on with their story that a lot of that stuff was open to interpretation. But I'm really glad that a game called Sonic and Knuckles, the plot was not that Sonic has to go save Knuckles. That would have been awfully lame. A little bit hard to look at the chat and play this at the same time. And let's see if I can remember. Like, for one thing, just Knuckles in Sonic 2 was a huge surprise, needless to say. Come to think of it, I think that when the day that I got this game, that my mom might have also brought me like this issue of Game Players magazine with Sonic and Knuckles as the cover story. That magazine turned out to be aimed a little bit more at like teenagers or like kids a little older than I was at the time, so there was a lot of stuff in there that kind of confused me. I always thought this boss was pretty funny. But the other thing that's kind of interesting about the fact that this game was split in two is that, like, for the longest time, the only way that I could play these levels was to play them with Sonic and Knuckles by itself. So I guess back when I was a kid, I probably played this one a little bit more by itself. Mostly because, like, well, the reason for that being that I had no idea how to get past the spinning barrel in Carnival Night Zone. Like, I was literally stuck there for like a year. Again, no internet, and again, equally, very little like experience with games to like fall back on. So, like, I had no way to take Tails into these stages, since he's not playable in Sonic and Knuckles. Overall, if I had to make an assessment, I'd probably say that the Sonic and Knuckles half of the game is a little bit weaker than the Sonic 3 half. More down to, like, its level themes and music than anything else. Although it is interesting that there's no water whatsoever in the Sonic and Knuckles half of the game. But I would only say that if I was like pressed to pick which game I liked better overall. And considering that they're ultimately two halves of the same game, it's a moot point. Excellent. I'm great at video games. You can tell I've been playing this for 23 years in one day. And I think it's telling, by the way, that Flying Battery Zone would make me think of that. Would make me think to say, hey, I like Sonic 3 a little bit better overall. One thing that I really hate about this stage is these elevator platforms. It's one of the... Like, Sonic 1 had a lot of elements like this, and Sonic 2 had a couple, but those elevator rooms in Flying Battery are one of the only examples in Sonic 3 and Knuckles of, like, some sort of a stage gimmick that just forces you to wait. And I guess this whole boss is another one. He's pretty boring. Somebody asks, is there usually a rhythm to charge up the spin dash that fast, or is it turbo buttons? No, what I do, I'm using a USB Sega Saturn controller to play this, and this is what I've done pretty much ever since I can remember to charge a spin dash. I take my hand completely off the controller, like my thumb completely off the buttons, and use 3 fingers to mash A, B, and C at the same time. Like that. That way I can charge it as fast as possible. It's one of those things I've been doing so long I don't even think about it. I guess since I was a little bit more seasoned by this point, I don't remember ever getting stuck by anything in Sonic & Knuckles. Like Sonic 2, I got stuck at Emerald. I remember getting stuck at Emerald Hill Zone Act 2, the first boss of the game. I was stuck there. That was probably the first place I was ever stuck on in a video game. And then, of course, I was stuck on the section in Chemical Plant where you have to jump up the blocks. In Sonic 3, I was stuck on the Carnival Night Barrel. But I don't think it took me all that long, relatively speaking, to finish Sonic & Knuckles. I do seem to remember that I finished the game as Knuckles well before I ever finished as Sonic, though. Not only because his game is a little bit shorter, but also because when you played in Sonic and when you played with Sonic 3 locked on, you didn't go, like, your path through Chemical Plant, or not Chemical Plant, bleh. Your path through Carnival Night didn't take you didn't take you through the spinning barrel area, so I was actually able to beat the stage. Never figured out how to beat that thing until I called the Sega Tips hotline, which cost my parents like probably at least $2 a minute, but I'm sure that was their intention. Somebody's asking how I feel about the Mania remix of Flying Battery. Mania is full. Let me see how I want to say this. Okay, let me draw a little bit of a comparison. I remember people being pretty disappointed when the Sonic Generations, when the list of stages in Sonic Generations was revealed, and that was very understandable because it was full of, you know, like the most popular stages, the most well-known stages, which tended to be the ones that were like first in the game. Similarly to that, of all the stages that were announced ahead of time for Mania, Flying Battery was probably the one that I was looking forward to the least. But Mania, much like Generations, manages to, like, invigorate its stages with enough new elements, while still feeling like the originals, that it more than justifies every single stage it brings in. And Flying Battery is a really great example of that. The way they incorporated elements from Wing Fortress Zone, and even a little bit, much as I'm loath to say it, taking the electrical hazards from Wacky Workbench. Yeah, it makes it feel like a completely reinvigorated place, and it's a lot of fun. That was actually one of the stages that I sort of kind of learned to speedrun in Sonic Mania. And of course, that's an ongoing process. After about my 15th playthrough of Mania, I started focusing more on trying to, like, master individual stages than just beating the game. But that will definitely be a stream I'll do before too long. The other stage from Sonic & Knuckles that was brought into Mania. I don't know if you guys saw that, if anybody here saw the stream I did of Sonic Mania the day it was released, but it was very different from this one. Mostly because, you know, it was my very first playthrough of the game, and, like, every couple of minutes I would see something, you know, I did my very best to stay away from spoilers on that game, so, like, I didn't know the stage list, there was just so much I didn't know about it. So every few minutes, like, I would just start screaming at Kalen to look at the thing that was in front of his face. That's also actually why I'm gonna hold off on doing an actual video for Sonic Mania for a little while longer, because I'm still so hyped and happy about that game that if I tried to do it now, I don't know. It would probably just consist of about 45 minutes of me screaming about individual pixels. Oh, but what I was saying earlier, the other stage that was brought in for Mania, Lava Reef Zone, was one of my favorite stages in this whole game. So I was super happy to see it there. Let's see. Well, somebody says that Stardust Speedway is their least favorite 2D Sonic stage. For me, and I'm only relating to this to, like, the classics, the pre-Sonic Adventure 2D games. But my least favorite 2D Sonic stage is well known, and that's Wacky Workbench from Sonic CD. I can see Stardust Speedway not being everybody's cup of tea, though. Love the music in both the US and Japanese soundtracks, but it does kind of just funnel you forward for a long time. Well, forward being a relative term. Alright, let's take a few questions. All I can see is, like, what was sort of recently said. Ooh, somebody has a controversial opinion. Dr. Mad says that Lava Reef music is better than Ice Cap music. This stage is a good example of how, in Sonic & Knuckles, playing as Knuckles is distinctly the hard mode. Because you saw there, this stage started out with the ghosts already being active. And from a plot standpoint, that's because Knuckles' playthrough, like, Knuckles' game takes place after Sonic, so this capsule that was housing the ghosts is already released. But I think it was a good move on Sega's part to kind of give you 3 ways to play this game, and I think that's where its replayability and longevity comes from. At least partly, of course. Is from the fact that, you know, Tails is easy mode, because you can fly over everything. Knuckles is hard mode, and then Sonic's kind of a neutral. Although, the downside to playing as Knuckles is that you miss out on the last 2 stages of the game entirely. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'd love to take more of your questions, and I'm sure I will whenever I... Aw, crap. That's a problem. He says they prefer the Wacky Workbench US present track over the EU one. I agree with that. I think I do too. Largely, this is gonna blow everybody's mind because I always try to stay so impartial. Because my gimmick is that I prefer whichever Sonic CD soundtrack you pick when in the Sonic CD episode that I did. I'm sure that nostalgia plays a large part in this, but I do, for the most part, prefer the tracks in the US version. That being said, I really like a lot of the tracks in the Japanese soundtrack as well. But, like, I've modded the PC version of Sonic Mania to, like, Stardust Speedway and Metallic Madness. Like, in one act, I'll play the new remix for Sonic Mania, and then for, I think, well, doesn't really matter. For the other act, I'll play, like, the US soundtrack, because I just thought that needed a little bit more representation. And it's cool to hear. You know, it plays to my nostalgia a little bit better. This stage is also an interesting example of how Knuckles can be used to, like, ignore hazards. What you're supposed to do is hit that stopper that was down there. Well, I say what you're supposed to do. Apparently, I'm not. I'm beginning to feel like that guy who played Cuphead. There we go. But yeah, using Knuckles' abilities, you can get over those hazards in a little bit more of a... Actually, honestly, it's easier to do it like this since you don't have the threat of being crushed. Although it's probably also a little bit slower. I'll just do it like this time. Ah, Blade Blur says Metallic Madness US is amazing. Man, that seems to be one of the most controversial tracks. Like, people who don't like the US soundtrack always point out that one as being one of their least favorites, or it's unsuited for Sonic. I agree though. I love that track. It's kind of short, and I guess I can see it being a little bit too low key, but like, again, it's nostalgia. Like, when I hear it, I relate it to those memories of, like, finally... Because whenever I played Sonic CD, we had to rent a Sega CD from Blockbuster, so it was a very special thing. So, after a lot of struggling... Because, you know, I knew I only had access to the game for a limited amount of time, so I'd always have to, like, really push myself to try to get through it. But just, like, finally making it to the last stage of the game. And, man, you heard that music, and you knew, like, this, okay. Metallic Madness, this is the last stage of Sonic CD. It was very threatening. It kind of reminded me, like, it wasn't so thematically off for me because I watched the Saturday morning cartoon, which was a lot darker and more foreboding than the games usually were at the time. So it reminded me a lot of that. I feel like Sonic and Knuckles, or more specifically, like the stages in Sonic and Knuckles, also have a little bit less of an emphasis on Knuckles-specific paths. Like, this stage has them. I know Mushroom Hill has it. Flying Battery doesn't. Lava Reef for sure does. Oh, duh. The Japanese version of Metallic Madness was like listening to the thrum of musical perfection. The American version is so much worse in comparison. No, like I said, I like them both. I really do like them both. There's not a song on either soundtrack of Sonic CD that I don't like. It's just, if pressed, I would probably pick the US version of most of them. And that includes Metallic Madness. Like, I can admit that, like, that da-da-da-da-da, like, that's way more fitting for a Sonic stage. But, nostalgia. Now, when you're playing as Knuckles, this boss walks much more quickly. If I remember right, I think all of the, crap. It ain't going so well. I remember being... If you take too long here, you just get crushed against the wall back there. This is also kind of interesting for me because normally at this point in the game, I have either supersonic or hypersonic or whatever. So it's good to stay brushed up on this stuff. That kid that came with his dad every Friday to Blockbuster to rent Sonic and Knuckles. That's cool. Alright. I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a break here and actually answer some of the questions. I'll kind of be a little bit more low-key about this Lava Reef playthrough. Although, I guess I should probably play until the stream catches up with what I just said. See, this is another Knuckles exclusive path. And honestly, I don't play through this game as Knuckles anywhere near as much as I do as Sonic. That mostly just comes down to how much I appreciate the insta-shield. And of course the fact that the game's longer that way. Somebody asked, is this Sonic and Knuckles alone? Yes, it is, in honor of the fact that the game came out 23 years ago. Saw somebody else ask if I've ever seen Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. You know, honestly, I think that Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, I think that my fandom of that show may predate my, me getting a Sega Genesis. I don't remember for sure, but that seems to make sense. Because I think that Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog probably came on like after school at the time on our local Fox Kids affiliate. And of course, that was the year that everybody got into Power Rangers, so I wonder if the fact that my friends at school like insisted that I try to catch Power Rangers led me to watch Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Like, I think I might have been, like, really into that show before I ever got a Genesis. And thus, it's kind of the show that got me into video games in the first place. Let's see, your least favorite classic Sonic games. Least favorite is kind of a relative term. I guess, on the Genesis, it's... Let me make sure I'm... not missing anything. On the Genesis of, like, the platformers, it'd have to be 3D Blast. That's kind of a no-brainer. Of the originals, like the Sonic 1, 2, 3, CD, and Knuckles, it'd probably be Sonic 1. Would be my least favorite. Power Rangers and Knuckles, that's good. Looking at the chat. Somebody says they hate Flying Battery and Sonic Mania. You know, interestingly enough, I was talking a little bit about speedrunning earlier. Sometimes my incentive for learning to speedrun a stage was just to avoid some of those slower elements of it. So, like, the path that I take through Flying Battery now avoids, like, a lot of that, you know, going in and out. In Act 2, for instance. And I think I got Act 1 down to, like, under a minute. Just finding a way to avoid that stuff. This boss is a lot harder for Knuckles, because you can't jump high enough to hit those things, except when they come up and down. And I know it's, I've got it posted at the top of the stream, but definitely check out that that Sonic 3 Unlocked blog. Somebody on the Sonic Retro forums has been running that thing since like late spring, I believe. It updates every single weekday and has just tons of cool like behind the scenes technical information about this game and like how it's put together. And he most recently completed a series on how lock-on technology actually worked and how all that was achieved. Just really, really fascinating stuff. And I will get back to the chat again here as soon as I beat this boss. This is another one that I've normally... where it normally goes a lot faster than this since I have a super transformation. Alright, let's see. Do you hate Sonic 1 like a lot of hipster YouTubers do now? No, I don't hate Sonic 1 at all. It's just that, like... It's just, I always sort of attributed it to the fact that I played Sonic 1 after Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. So it seemed a little, to use my favorite word, superannuated from my perspective. That, and I do feel like that they were still sort of, Green Hill aside, they were still sort of trying to figure out what sort of the limits of this engine were. There were parts of it where it seemed more designed like a traditional platformer, as opposed to something that, you know, could utilize speed and momentum and the physics engine and the stuff that made Sonic special. That said, I don't hate Sonic 1 by any means. I enjoy playing it. Let's see. Ben Woodring wants to hear my thoughts on the switches killing the smoke in Mania's Oil Ocean. Honestly, that's the first I'd really even thought about it as being a problem. If it's a stretch, then it's no more a stretch than the same switches in Sandopolis Act 2 turning the lights on. I mean, I guess, in fact, it might make a little bit more sense that, you know, a sort of modern factory would have switches to vent the smoke, rather than like an ancient temple having them. But I don't tend to. I will forgive a lot of stuff like that in like service of it being a video game. It's kind of like how I kept saying throughout the Metroid series that, like, yeah, Samus loses her power, doesn't have any of her previous power-ups at the start of every game, but what game would there be if she did? Like, I don't mind, like, I think it's really cool when fans come up with explanations for stuff like that, but the lack of an official explanation for those things never bothers me. And I'm kind of going off on a tangent here. Let's look at the chat. Sonic 2 is better than Sonic 06. That's my own opinion, so feel free to disagree with it. Alright. Somebody said that Sonic 2's level design just wasn't rewarding to play for me. Yeah, I can understand that. Sonic 2's level design was... Like, I recently renamed my episode on Sonic 3 The Perfect Fusion, and then I died immediately as soon as I started talking about it. I renamed it, by the way, from... it used to be called The Best in the World, which was a little bit of an outdated CM Punk reference at this point. But I named it that for a couple of reasons. One was the sort of obvious, it's a fusion of Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, that's obvious. But also, there's a part in that video where I talk about how it was a fusion of, like, the best aspects of Sonic 1 and 2's different approaches to level design. I have this whole section where I talk about how it perfects the formula, I think is the term I used. Like, Sonic 1 was largely slower paced, and it and CD especially rewarded exploration a lot more. Sonic 2 was a lot more speed-focused, and like you look at the maps for its stages, and it's not quite linear by any means, but it has a lot more focus on speed, and on... oh, I didn't even mean to go into that bonus stage. Oh well. It has a lot more focus on speed, and it has a lot less focus on platforming. And then Sonic 3, I think the one reason that it is so highly regarded is because it sort of combines the best aspects of both of those approaches. It's the point where, like, the level design sort of takes on this whole new level of, like, polish. And regardless of how you want to play it, if you want to, you know, explore and go for the bonuses and look for the special rings, you'll have a good time. Or if you want to learn how to speed through them and speed run them and just sort of blast through as fast as you can, that's also a good time. But it's not like and blasting through them is not nearly like so overt to the degree that it would become in later Sonic games. You know, there's still a lot to break up the what some people would feel is monotony of just running forward. I'm gonna die. No, I'm not. Point being, yeah, I can see where, depending on your preferences, you might have a problem with Sonic 2. I feel similarly about Sonic CD, because it is so just... it's so clunky in its level design in a lot of ways, to my tastes. Let's put it like that. Somebody says Sonic 2 has bad pacing. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It can. Glad to hear you got Zero Mission. I've played that. I played through that game about 15 times since I did my episode on it. Blade Blur, Blade Blur says that they prefer the Sonic and Knuckles collection PC tracks for Carnival Night and Launch Base anyway, not so much Rise Cap. That's actually not that much of a controversial opinion. I get that. I hear that a lot from people who who grew up with that version. I guess it's a little bit like saying that, you know, you prefer the US soundtrack of Sonic CD. A whole lot of that is going to come down to what you grew up with. Although, correct me if I'm wrong, and you did actually play the Genesis version first, and only now, only once you heard it did you come to prefer the PC tracks. That's one of those things that it's really hard for me to, like, state a definitive preference on. Because who's to say that if those weren't the original tracks that I wouldn't prefer them? Nostalgia's a hell of a drug, is what I'm saying. A good drug, though. It's something I enjoy a lot. A lot of people will say, ah, you're just a nostalgic fanboy. We don't need to listen to what you say. But no, I don't think there's anything wrong with liking the things that you grew up with and being biased toward some of the things that you first experienced. Oh man, I'm almost to the end of the game. It's just sort of a matter of being honest about it. Being honest both in, like, your criticism and in terms of, like, don't try to frame it as an objective opinion, I guess is what I'm saying. Obviously, yes, I think Sonic Mania is a great callback to the classic Sonic games. I played it quite a bit. Somebody says, is DKCR, that is Donkey Kong Country Returns, the Sonic Mania of the Donkey Kong series? I actually don't think so. I think I was actually on a podcast, on the Conversation podcast about a month ago, talking about that very thing, and no, I think that a Sonic Mania equivalent for Donkey Kong would have a whole lot more in common, both gameplay-wise and in terms of its style, with the Super Nintendo games. Like, Donkey Kong Country Returns feels like a game that, like, you pretend that Donkey Kong games never stopped coming out. Our DKC games never stopped coming out, and then in 2010, just another one came out. That's what it feels like. It feels very modern. Sonic Mania, as the dev team said, is like what would have happened if a 2D Sonic game had come out on the Sega Saturn in 1996. Let's see. Somebody says, have you played through Other M recently? Yeah. That's my next episode, so I'm playing through it right now. So I'm not going to talk about that too much. Let's see. Somebody says they don't like Sonic Mania having Lava Reef in it because it loses all the context. I know a lot of people were a little bit frazzled about the lack of level transitions in Mania. I enjoyed the level transitions that did sort of give context to the adventure. But for me, that's just another one of those things, like, it's an acceptable break from reality of it being a video game. Obviously, from what I said earlier, I really, really liked Lava Reef being in Mania. It feels weird. Let's see. Sonic Mania may be the next stream I do. And seeing as that's a game that I haven't done a video on yet, I'll probably have a little bit more to say about it. Alright, let's go ahead and finish this game. You say you're playing through it right now, Other M right now, but it looks like you're playing through Sonic and Knuckles right now. Yeah, right now is a relative term. Okay, honestly, since you guys are here, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on with Other M. Actually, no, let's save that for after this boss. Let's keep the focus on Sonic for now. Remind me after this, and I'll tell you. Like I said earlier, it didn't take me all that long. It doesn't seem like to finish Sonic and Knuckles. I remember getting here fairly quickly. Did beat its Knuckles well before I ever got there as Sonic. And honestly, like I've only been on stream for like 30 or 40 minutes at this point. The Knuckles playthrough in particular can be a really short game. And the guy who said earlier that he felt like Lava Reef lost the context in Sonic Mania, if you want to like elaborate on what you mean by that a little bit, that'd be good. I like how Knuckles is missing his arm in that shot. So that is Sonic & Knuckles. In my time zone, there's 5 minutes until October 18th ends, so I'm glad I got to play through it in its entirety, despite getting a late start. On the day it was originally released. And I also saw somebody ask if I preferred Donkey Kong or Metroid overall. And, I mean, that's an easy answer. I'll always be a bigger Donkey Kong fan than I will... a bigger Donkey Kong Country fan than I will be of just about anything else. Sonic being one of the few exceptions. You know, this ending, though, I see somebody saying, I remember when I was young and I was sad the island fell when you didn't get all the emeralds. When I first got to this ending, for some reason, maybe it was the triumphant music or whatever, but, or maybe I just didn't understand what the plot was at all, but I thought that for some reason this was a good thing. Like the Egg Robo and Metal Sonic had like jacked the island up into the sky, and now Knuckles had returned it to its rightful place in the sea. I don't know where I got that, considering I knew it was called the Floating Island, but whatever. I also thought, and this is because I had an official player's guide for Sonic & Knuckles that claimed that this was the case, that according to that player's guide, both Sonic and Knuckles' stories were taking place at the same time, but, like, Robotnik didn't want Knuckles to know that he had tricked him, but he still wanted to stop him for some reason. So they ignored the whole Egg Robo thing, and they claimed that that was Robotnik wearing a disguise. So that's always what I thought. Okay, here's what I've noticed about Other M. That game is one of the most, what's the word I'm looking for? It's really, really, really dense in terms of what it gets me to think about. Typically, what I've been doing lately when I've been playing a game, like I'm recording the footage, and then as I'm playing, when I think of something, or when I know that there's a time code that I'm going to want to use in the script, I'll make a note of that. So, you know, I might say, like, Session 5, and then I'll have a couple of notes throughout, and then I'll move on to Session 6. What I'm noticing with Other M is that those notes that I'm taking are exponentially longer than they've been for any other game I played. Like every time I play it, it gives me a lot to think about, and a lot that I want to touch on, and, like, this script could be really, really, really dense if I throw all of that in there. I'm a little bit undecided as to just how much of that I want to get in, but like I said, I don't want to say too much. I don't want to say whether I'm having a good time or having a bad time, but what I'll note is that it's giving me, like, every single and I typically break them off into 30-minute chunks, and like every 30 minutes I have a lot of notes. So there's your sneak peek. Poor Knuckles goes back to his home planet in the good ending as we see him flying in space. Let's go ahead and start a Sonic playthrough. I'm having a good time. And I hope you guys are too. Pokemologist says Knuckles' story is supposed to take place after, I thought. And yeah, that is definitely what they were going for. It's just the strategy guide that I read when I was a kid didn't say anything about that. I don't think anybody's asked this question, but playing a Sonic here is making me think of it. The Insta-Shield has always been like something that I've thought of as being a really fantastic tool for Sonic to have. And I stand by that. I still think it is. It's something, but it is something that takes, like, that rewards skilled play. And I think that's what Sonic's playthrough in Sonic 3 and Knuckles is all about. Like, he's the character, despite not having the abilities of Tails and Knuckles, he's sort of the character with the highest skill ceiling. The Instant Shield can allow you to defeat certain bosses and overcome obstacles a lot faster if you implement it well. That being said, I think the drop dash in Sonic Mania is a wonderful, wonderful idea, and given how long Sonic ROM hacking has been around, I'm really fascinated that nobody seems to have thought of anything quite like that before. Good example of the Instant Shield here, though. I also think the drop dash, like, you know, as much as I praise the Insta Shield, it's something that took me probably years before I really started using consistently. Whereas the drop dash fits much more obviously with what Sonic's supposed to be good at. I'm undecided as to which one I prefer, but I really see the merits of both of them. Somebody said the Insta Shield is why I almost never play Tails and rarely play Knuckles. Yeah, same here. I just like that Insta Shield too much. See you guys in the chat talking about a Frame Meister. This playthrough is being done on a mini Sega Genesis, which is actually a Sega Genesis USB hub with a Raspberry Pi inside of it. That I've spent entirely too much time working on and building and customizing. But I like it a lot. It's a shame in cases like this that I don't like RPGs more, since those are games that I could play and look at the chat more consistently. Somebody says, I feel the same way about the Insta Shield, but why not have both? Well, that's another thing you can do with by modding the PC version of Mania. And that's exactly the setup I've got going on. By the way, speaking of Mania, I didn't mention this at the start of the stream, but that one special stage that I did as Knuckles, I'm so used to the Mania blue spheres that it looked really unusually choppy. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. Blue Yoshi says twice, what is your favorite Sonic game? Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Sonic Mania has a chance of being my favorite, but that's one of those things where I feel like it's way too new for me to fairly judge like that. I always like to give it a few years and get some hindsight. But the fact that I could even say that Sonic Mania could be a contender, you know, that's something. That shows you how much I like it. Despite the combined game with the mimetic name being the way to go, do you still recommend the split-apart games? Recommend? I don't know. I mean, I think of Sonic 3 as Sonic 3. Like, and when saying that, I mean that, like, Sonic 3 is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. That's the complete game. I don't often think about them separately. But I guess some of the differences in Sonic and Knuckles might be, you know, interesting to look at. Really like the Sonic and Knuckles title screen. That's always been very iconic to me. The fact that Knuckles actually gets an intro in Sonic and Knuckles alone is also pretty neat. But a lot of this stuff, you know, it's stuff that's fixed in the Sonic 3 Complete hack anyway, where Knuckles does have an intro in Angel Island. So, for my sake, I don't typically play Sonic and Knuckles by itself, or Sonic 3 by itself for that matter. Though, perhaps, if it wasn't for Sonic 3 Complete, I would do that a little more often. Not only the Insta-Shield, though, I just noticed I was using it, but also the shield power-ups that Sonic gets are just fantastically useful. And I think it's a shame that newer Sonic games get away from stuff like this. Mania aside, like, I always thought it was awfully strange how in Generations, for instance, like, you could equip the shields as power-ups, but they weren't, like... And you had the Fireball Spin Dash, the Bubble Bounce, and all that stuff, but they weren't just, like, hidden within stages. Like, the way that shields are placed through stages in this game, like, the Fire Shield's a good choice here, both because it lets you get through the, lets you ignore those obstacles that spurt out flames, and because Flying Battery's level design... Well, crap. As I talk about how good Flying Battery's level design is. Flying Battery's level design is very conducive to using that Flame Burst attack. And also, of course, there's the fact... Let's go this way this time. And also, of course, the fact that, you know, being able to hold on to these abilities rewards you for not doing what, you know, newbie Sonic players would do and just blindly pushing ahead through a stage. Like, you have to be good enough at the stage to not get hit so you can hold on to this stuff. And I will take another question. Let's see. Glitchy chat. Is the chat doing okay? Okay, here's a good one. I see somebody asked what my thoughts are... Oh, crap, I fell down here. What my thoughts are on Sonic Rush. Or Sonic Rush Adventure. I'll go ahead and answer this, since neither one of those games will be part of the next Sonic season. Is that thing... There it comes. Jeez. Sonic Rush was one of the biggest reasons that I wanted a Nintendo DS. I borrowed a friend's copy, and absolutely fell in love with that game. Love the soundtrack. Is there, like, another... I don't... Oh, there we go. Okay. I don't come this way often. Absolutely loved Sonic Rush. Fell in love with the soundtrack. I'll admit that in a lot of ways, the gameplay itself is not a patch on the classics. But for what it was... Like, for being what it was at the time, it was a different take on 2D Sonic. This kind of, maybe this kind of relates to the earlier question about Sonic Mania compared to like something like Donkey Kong Country Returns. Sonic Rush changed the format and modernized a lot of things about it, and you know, introduced the world to having a boost leader, which I understand isn't so in line with a lot of people's preferences when it comes to Sonic. But, you know, as you can see here, I mostly just ignore the bonus stages and the special stages and the exploration anyway. It's why as we were talking about earlier, I always preferred Sonic 2 to both 1 and CD. So, you know, I tend to speed through Sonic games anyway, which is probably why I like that style of game more. Sort of similar to how people who like a little bit more of a slower pace and like a little bit more exploration had a lot more fun with Sonic Lost World than I did, while still mostly being able to admit that it was a pretty flawed game. Fire Drake says this is his second favorite game on the Genesis. What would be your first? Blue Yoshi asks what rank I would give to Metroid Fusion, and yeah, I'll open it up a little bit more to non-Sonic questions now, I suppose, since I already beat the game once. For the answer to that question, I made a frequently asked questions video, and I think the last question I answered in that shows where I'd put all the Metroid games that I played. That being said, and I know this is something I said in the video, but depending on what I'm in the mood to play depending on what I'm looking for and what I'm in the mood to play, I could probably say that any game in the Metroid series that I've played already, aside from 1, 2, and the first Prime, is my favorite. Like, you know, if I'm looking for something really difficult and intense, I'd probably play Fusion. If I'm looking for a good mix of all the best elements, I'd play Super. If I'm looking for something to sort of relax and speed through, I'd play Zero Mission. Which is why it's become the Metroid game I've beaten the most, actually. Like, I think, and even 1, 2, and Prime, I could... I could tell you what's good about them, and I could tell you what makes them special. And depending on your preferences, Prime 1 in particular, I could highly recommend to somebody who has a little bit different preferences than I do. Let's see. This might be an unpopular opinion, this is from the chat, but after playing the original DKC, I still think that its approach to skill-based speed is more effective than Sonic from a gameplay perspective. You know, that's one of those things, like I said earlier, that's difficult for me to judge fairly because I've just been playing these games for so long. A lot of the criticism that came out about classic Sonic's design in the wake of the hype of Sonic Mania sort of made me feel the same way. Like, maybe I sort of recall having a problem with that, like, 20 years ago, but, you know, I never got a single game over in Sonic Mania, and it's because it aligns so closely with the skills that I've been honing for pretty much my whole life anyway. So, of course, I won it. But I can see the argument there that, like, especially for a first-time player, Donkey Kong Country is probably a lot more fair than Sonic. And let's take the best out, the best from each series. Let's say compare this game, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, to Donkey Kong Country 2. They're both certainly very challenging games, but I can see the argument that DKC 2 gives you, because it's not so speed focused, because I guess it does even have a little bit more variety. It probably is a more fair skill curve than this. But, like I said, that's something that's going to be really hard for me to fairly judge. Are you glad Mania removed the crushing elevators and flying battery zone? Yeah, I don't know if you were here when, I don't know if you were here when I was doing the Knuckles playthrough of this level, but that was one of my least favorite things about this zone. Not because they're difficult, but because they're boring. I never liked the elements in the Sonic games that required me to just wait around. Like, I didn't mind it when there was, like, a safer option, and then one with a little bit more, like, that required more finesse that you could get over something. Like, this right here is a good example, because I'm up here, and now all there is to do is wait on this elevator to rise. But, like, another good example, the first example that always comes to mind is the rotating bolts in Metropolis Zone. Just how many of those there are, and how slow they are, and how frustrating it is to get knocked down by the star-shaped badniks and have to, like, scroll it off screen and do the whole thing over again. Like, Sonic 3 and Knuckles keeps that stuff to a bare minimum for the most part, but those elevator platforms and flying battery are one of the few examples of it in this game. Captain says Sonic's always been about replayability and finding new combination of routes for me. Yeah, that's pretty much the difference. Like, DKC may hold up a little bit better in, like, modern times because, and let me see what I'm trying to say here. I can't speak to what kids' preferences are now, but there was a lot more of a focus in this era of gaming on replayability, and that's where Sonic excels. The multitude of routes through a stage and the extremely high skill ceiling is what keeps you coming back to these games. There are things about the classic Sonic series, like, I still find myself sometimes discovering like new special rings and new routes, and I remember just a few years ago I found like a path through Chemical Plant that that lets you skip the whole block section. And I already knew about one path that will let you skip that block section with the water rising. I already knew about one, and it turns out there was another that was a little bit more lucrative and had more goodies, but it was slower. Stuff like that, man. Like, I still find out more things. I still find new things in these games, and given how much I've played them and how long I've played them, that is insane. But it's like how magazines back in the day, Game Pro comes to mind, would, you know, give a score rating based on a game's replayability, because that was such a big deal, and that was partly because so many more gamers were kids at the time. So, you know, you didn't have, if you could only get a game like a couple times a year, your birthday or Christmas or whatever, like it needed to be replayable, and I think that's why there was so much more of a focus on that. And to this day, my favorite games tend to be the ones that are very replayable, that are do that cliched thing of being easy to learn and difficult to master. I'm not saying for a second that you know, games with more of a narrative focus or more of a cinematic focus, that there's anything wrong with that. I think that games can and should be a lot more than just tests of skill, but nonetheless, tests of skill is usually what I find myself gravitating toward to this day. But to relate that back to Donkey Kong Country 2, to digress, what I meant when I said that DKC may hold up a little bit better is that I think for a single playthrough, if you're just gonna if you only have time to play through the game once, yeah, DKC 2 probably would give you a stronger experience than just playing a Sonic game for the first time would. Which is not to say for a second that the Donkey Kong Country series lacks replayability, because I would hope that I could count myself as a testament to the fact that it does. But when I did the episode for Donkey Kong Country, there was originally a lot more in the script that sort of compared it more directly to Sonic. And I took that out because at the time, I was a little bit worried. I was a little bit worried about being known as the Sonic guy. And I didn't want to overstate it. But I do think that a lot... Like, I love Mario games, don't get me wrong. I've played pretty much all of them. I enjoy them. But they never quite gripped me. They never gripped me anywhere near to the degree that Sonic did. And the first game series outside of Sonic that really did, like, you know, that really did sort of scratch that itch was Donkey Kong Country. And I think that's because of the elements in terms of replayability, in terms of momentum, in terms of having a really high skill ceiling, and being a little bit faster paced. I think that's because of those elements in Donkey Kong Country that let me get that attached to it. All right, I've been talking for a long time. Let's see what the chat's been saying. Somebody asked what my favorite Sonic Advance is. That's pretty easy. It's got to be Sonic Advance 1. That was far and away the one that I played the most. Sonic Advance 1 hymns a little bit more closely, or really a lot more closely, than the other two do to the classic style. Although I don't think it's really... There's a debate that goes around sometimes talking about, like, you know, is Sonic Advance a better Sonic 4 than the actual Sonic 4 is? And my answer to that would be yes. But it still would have been disappointing to look at in the context of a follow-up to this game. I'm sure I'll go into that more in when I actually do the episode next season on the Sonic Advance series. Sonic Advance 2... I mean, I loved, like, the first 2 stages quite a lot, but the level design in that game was like Sonic 2 on steroids. That is, it had the problem of being really linear and speed-focused, and it just kind of... I remember the bosses in that game all have you just, like, running. Cream was in it, I guess that's interesting. As an even easier mode. But I still probably like Sonic Advance 2 more than I like Sonic Advance 3. And I know that's a little bit of a controversial opinion, because there are people who swear by Advance 3. I don't know if I was just still burnt out from Heroes, which really sort of, I'll also be talking about Heroes next season. Sonic Advance 3, though, is the only one of the trilogy that I've never actually beaten. So I'm sure I'll be doing that next season when I do the episode on it. So, I don't know, maybe I'll gain a greater appreciation for it, but at the time, I just could not get into it. Somebody did ask me earlier, I don't even know if they're still here, what my least favorite 8-bit Sonic game is. And that's a pretty easy answer. That would be Sonic Blast. Which is, Sonic Blast for the Game Gear, which is pretty bad. My favorite 8-bit Sonic game is actually a little bit surprising. That would be Sonic 1 for the Game Gear. And that's something I talked about in the Sonic wrap-up episodes that I did. But basically I just felt that Sonic 1 didn't try to do anything that was sort of outside of the Game Gear's capability, whereas the rest of them did. You know, they tried to have speedy sections, and while it was still like an impressive technical feat for the hardware, I don't think it holds up as being quite as fun. Whereas Sonic 1 8-bit was, you know, slower paced and more platformy, and it played to the Game Gear's strengths a little bit better. I love how Cream lets you totally cheese the final boss. That's a good one. I might have to remember that and use it and use it in my script. Might have to steal that one from you. Somebody asks, what do you think of Yoshi's Island? Interesting. This has been brought up a couple of times lately. I've gotten this question, I think, on Twitter pretty recently. Anyway, Yoshi's Island is another one of those games that I can see why other people love it, but it never really clicked with me the way that even, like, the other Mario games did. The point of Yoshi's Island is very, like, what the gameplay and the style pushes you toward is to explore every stage and find all the flowers and make sure you keep your baby Mario meter at like 20 or 30 or whatever it is. I think it's 30. And get all the red coins and, you know, run it as a score attack. And obviously that's not... Oh, crap. Obviously, good timing there. That's not what I generally enjoy doing in a platformer. But the problem there is that when you try to play it, you know, whenever I try to play it and just run through it, like, it's not sort of mechanically interesting enough for me to get a whole lot out of it. Like, there's no run button, there's no sense of, like, momentum. Yoshi just always runs at a very set, fixed pace. That said, it's a game that I had when I was a kid, and it's a game that I played a lot. I mean, I I beat it once upon a time, and that final boss still sticks with me and stands out as one of the best bosses of the whole 16-bit generation. But I think it's telling that whenever I would put that cartridge in later years, I would always just play that last level. And I would always just go through that again. Like, I never once wanted to, like, go back and play through the game again. Okay, let's take another question here. I think this is where I took a question before I died. I have not done a Mario season, although one would definitely be on the table. Tyler Rosen asks, who would you say are your biggest inspirations for making videos? Well, when I set out to do this channel, like, it might be obvious from watching the early episodes, but I didn't really have, like, a format in mind. There was never a point where I sat down and I was like, okay, so I want to look at games from this perspective, and I want to do things this. There was no formula to it. Which may also be why some of the earlier episodes are, you know, pretty experimental. Like, I didn't want it to be one set thing, but to answer the question, I guess, you know, all online video game analysis people, with the exception of Classic Game Room, probably owe something to James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd. He came along right as, you know, YouTube was really taking off. Oh god. Okay, I thought that's where I died earlier, and that it was going to happen again. He came along right as YouTube was getting big, right as broadband, high-speed internet became, like, ubiquitous enough for something like that to work. And, yeah, I think we all owe something to him. That being said, while I always found his show, you know, entertaining, and I thought it was awesome that, you know, somebody was getting on here, was you know, putting something like this together and making video games, or making a show about video games, it didn't really gel with me quite the same way as things that took themselves a little bit more, I don't want to say seriously, but things that were, like, shows that were a little bit more optimistic, that weren't just laughing at bad games. So I guess I'll say one big inspiration might be a show called The Happy Video Game Nerd, which, you know, obviously it was a takeoff on the Angry Video Game Nerd, but instead of talking about games that suck and how much and why they sucked, he would talk about what made a game good or what made a game revolutionary, and he would often talk about, like, hidden gems. So when people started coming along that sort of took the history of video games a little bit more seriously, and they totally, like, people who would completely unironically talk about, like, how much they love this medium and how much they love this game growing up, and what a big deal this was for the industry and to them personally. One thing, another guy I could mention would be Movie Bob, who did a show called The Game Overthinker, and eventually it became a little bit more. The Game Overthinker became like a show where he would dress up in costumes and make jokes and stuff. And that was fine. I mean, I know that's what he wanted to do. But the early episodes of The Game Overthinker, like, I remember I would watch them sometimes, and I'd follow what he was saying, and like, I would just get chills from it because of how much it meant to him, and I could relate to that, and I could understand that. So I'd say that was also another big inspiration, and just guys like that. And occasionally on my channel, I'll get comments saying, "Oh man, this part where you were talking about this gave me chills," and I'm like, yes! It makes me really, really happy to hear things like that, because I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, Crappy Blue Luigi points out that Stop Skeletons from the Happy Video Game Nerd eventually morphed into a YouTube channel called Stop Skeletons from Fighting. I would definitely recommend that. People are talking about how Movie Bob eventually got a lot more political. I mean, I'll admit that I didn't, like, when I'm talking about the early episodes of Game Overthinker, I'm talking about, like, the first 25 was probably the height of when I was really into that show. That being said, it does, like, I keep politics as much as I possibly can out of my channel, and out of my content, and out of what I'm doing right now. Like, if somebody asked me a particularly political question right now, I wouldn't answer it. And that's not because I don't have an opinion on it, but just because I think that there's a lot of that out there, and it's not like what I want my content or my work or to focus on. I think that I'm fine with having the Geek Critique be something that celebrates video games and perhaps even acts sometimes as a refuse from all that craziness that might be going on out there. That being said, it does really bother me when I see... Because, you know, a lot of YouTubers don't take that approach. A lot of YouTubers will openly talk about their politics on Twitter or on Facebook or even make jokes about it within the videos. And that's fine. It bothers me when people say, oh, you're an entertainer, you're here for this, you shouldn't be sharing your opinions about this. And I totally disagree with that, too. I think that your channel and your body of work and your... for one thing, it can be about what you want it to be about. There may be repercussions there, but it can and should be. And for another thing, like anybody being an entertainer or being a YouTuber or being a celebrity or anything like that does nothing to like invalidate them as a person. You know what I mean? Which I think should be pretty obvious, but I guess the point is, while I also sort of got away from watching a whole lot of Movie Bob as his Game Over Thinker show became a little bit more, not just political, but like entertainment focused, I guess, instead of analysis focused. That was really the bigger factor for me. But I don't think there's anything wrong with him going in the direction that he wanted to go with it. And somebody also says that they don't mind politics being presented as long as it's not an echo chamber, and yeah, I agree with that too. That's something I talked about on Twitter a little while back, is that regardless of politics, I feel like the internet makes it really, really easy to ensconce yourself in an echo chamber. And not just easy, but it's sort of like, it incentivizes it. What made me think of that is I went on the Google News reader, and it had curated a bunch of news stories with rather clickbaity headlines that espoused positions that I already agreed with. And that's because, you know, the algorithm or whatever, like, knows what I'll like and has figured out what I'm likely to agree with. But that's really dangerous because it means you have to go out of your way to sort of expose yourself to what anybody else thinks. I think nuance is kind of... can be a difficult thing to come by, both in video game criticism and outside of it. To the point that some people just seem like they just ignore it entirely. Like, I've had people come on, like, my Metroid Prime video. You know, I had a very critical opinion of that game. I had a very, I did not enjoy myself a whole lot playing Metroid Prime. But I feel like I presented my arguments, and other people have told me that they didn't feel like personally attacked by it. That they could see where I was coming from despite disagreeing. And that's a really, really healthy thing to be able to do. But nonetheless, I've gotten comments saying, like insulting me for hating Metroid Prime. And, you know, I tried really hard to take a nuanced position on that, but I think that, nuance comes, like, an appreciation for nuance at least partly comes from maturity. And I don't think that, I think there are people who just never really get that. Who never really, come to appreciate or look for that. Boy, this Sonic & Knuckles stream is getting really heavy all of a sudden, isn't it? Do you think Sonic Boom is dead? No, I think the show's still running, isn't it? Or is that what you mean? Did the show end? I enjoyed what I watched of the show. As far as another Sonic Boom video game, yeah, I really doubt it. As a matter of fact, I have a theory... Do I want to reference Matt Pat? Yeah. I have a theory that Sonic Forces, like the character creator in Sonic Forces, may have originally been Boom Sonic. And I just based that on the fact that, like, the gameplay for the custom character, you know, involves that, like, lasso thing and the grapple, like, with the grapple mechanic and everything, which, like, everybody in Sonic Boom had. So I really wonder if at some point in development, Sonic Forces was going to include, like, Modern Sonic, Classic Sonic, and Boom Sonic. and then the Boom series had such a bad rep that they decided to go in a different direction. Makes a lot of sense to me. I saw some people earlier asking what I think of Sonic Forces in general. Honestly, I'm kind of doing the same thing with it that I am with Mario Odyssey, oddly enough. And that is that, like... Mario Odyssey more so, honestly, but I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to playing it. I'm gonna buy it when it comes out. But until then, I'm not gonna, like, look too closely at it. I know it's been a very, very controversial game. I know a lot of people haven't been happy with what they've been showing, or with really how the relative lack of information we have on it. But I would rather just take a sort of a wait-and-see approach. And the game will be what it will be. And regardless, I've said this on Sonic Retro a handful of times, I will probably find something to enjoy about it as long as it has more, like, Sonic Unleashed style gameplay. You know? The whole boost to win formula gels really well with what I like. So, regardless of anything, any of the extracurricular stuff around it, sort of like with the Werehog and Sonic Unleashed, I'm sure I'll have a good time with it at least a little bit of the time. But man, the day that character creator was revealed, I was like, man, this... this is not aimed at my part of the fandom, is it? I guess that's the problem with it. It kind of seems like it's trying to satisfy everyone, and given how divided the Sonic fandom is, you're just not gonna do that. By the way, this boss is super boring. Really, really time-consuming. Not very difficult at this point. Most of the classic Sonic bosses have, like, a way to beat them really, really fast if you're good enough, and if you like, time your insta-shield well enough. This one does not. Honestly, what I usually do with this one, since I have, like, Hypersonic by this point in the game, is I just go Hyper and then speed up the emulator, like so. Just to get it over with faster. Let's see what people been saying. Some lovely video quality stuff happening because of the lava background. Yeah, it doesn't seem that the encoder is exactly built for side-scrolling. As the video quality's cleaned up now. From my view, it looks fine now. Yeah, it's probably just because of the massive amount of data from the lava on screen. Speaking of Sonic Boom, though, since I saw somebody else just bring it up in the chat, Sonic Boom is another Sonic game that I've never beaten. In fact, I don't even own it. Literally all I've played of it is the demo that came out on the Wii U. Well, obviously it came out on the Wii U, that was the only system it came out for. And at this point, I'll probably just wait until I get to it in my, chronologically in a Sonic retrospective before I actually play it. So that'll be kind of interesting. This next season, I'll be playing through Sonic Heroes for the first time, since 2004, probably. Like, I beat it when it came out, and I barely played it since. Which is interesting, because most Sonic games are kind of evergreen for me. Like, I pick them up and play them at least every year or two. But Sonic Heroes has not been like that. Dr. Robotnik didn't think the heat mobile through. Nope. Somebody says that I'm one of the few who dislikes the day stages in Sonic Unleashed. Yeah, you know, I think that just comes back to that whole, do you prefer Sonic CD or Sonic 2 thing? The boost stages in really all the boost games, like, I love them. I think they're really fun. I think that calling them boost to win is very similar to saying that classic Sonic games were all hold right to win, but man, I can see why people don't like them. Because, like this game, if you take your time and you want to look for different paths and you want to, you know, explore, you'll have a good time doing that. In the boost games, if you try to do that, you'll just be constantly funneled through with speed boosters and speed up sections and rainbow rings, and like there's only one right way to play them. And it's not especially fun to play them any other way. That said, I do think that, similar to how Sonic 3 nails the fusion between exploration and speed, that Sonic 1 and 2 were sort of were sort of polar opposites on, I think Sonic Generations, even in its boost stages, has a little bit more nuance to its level design, and does reward multiple playthroughs with different pathways and a little bit more exploration. But no, I can understand why the boost games might not gel with somebody. The thing about Generations, in particular, I don't know. I'm gonna do a video on it at some point, so I'm debating if I want to save this point for that, since I have been mulling on this for a long time. Sonic Generations didn't do anything to incentivize a replay, even though that's where most of the game's fun came from. Like, the point of those, you know, complex boost stages was to become more and more skillful and to blast through them with more and more style in it. And when you get that down, like, it becomes just this absolute thrill of a game. But, like, the ranking system handed out S ranks basically if you got through a stage without dying. There were no unlocks tied to completing a stage quickly. So, I mean, despite the fact that I put like 250 hours into Sonic Generations, you know, most people aren't going to do that. And that is admittedly, that does go back to the problem we were talking about earlier with replayability and how much less incentivized it is in general in modern gaming. This path switcher messed up. There it goes. Blade Blur says if they didn't get enough time to develop Sonic Boom, I'll cut them some slack. From what I've heard, and sorry if I get any information wrong here, but the primary problem with Sonic Boom was that it was originally being developed for the 360 and PS3, is that right? Or was it being developed for the next-gen systems? Does that timeline add up right? In any case, they had, from what I understand, a limited amount of time to port it to basically make it a Wii U game, because Sega signed that exclusivity deal with Nintendo. The problem being that the Wii U was based on a completely different architecture, the PowerPC architecture, which is the same thing that powered the Wii and the GameCube, than the more modern 360 and PS3, which, you know, run on, I think, like X64. I'm not that much of a tech person to know. The point is, the engine that Sonic Boom was designed in, which was that Unity? Again, don't quote me on this, for God's sake. The engine that Sonic Boom ran in didn't really run all that well on the Wii U hardware, and they didn't have enough time to optimize it. And I've heard that that was a large part of the problem. And given that, it's a little bit unfortunate that the development team that Sega licensed it out to caught so much of the heat for that. Since, as usual, it was at least partly down to Sega's Sega's own decision-making. King K says, "Yo, I fell asleep as soon as you began this stream. Sorry I'm late." That's okay, man. I'm probably gonna wrap up here soon. and go back and play more Other M. Somebody says they liked Adventure 2 for making ranks hard to get. Yeah, that's one thing I can absolutely praise Adventure 2 for, is that it did a much better job in, like, you know, you got emblems for getting A ranks on stages. And the A ranks were actually very difficult to get. There's still stages in Adventure 2 that I can't consistently get A ranks on. That being said, I never really tried all that much on anything except the speed stages, but that's Adventure 2 for you. But, like, even in Unleashed, it was much, much harder to get high rankings than it was in Generations. Like, in Generations, you could pretty much just push, let's, like, get hit, lose your rings, pick one up, rinse and repeat, and as long as you didn't die, you would probably get an A rank, or an S rank. Always like that room in Death Egg Zone, by the way. The anti-gravity room. What I don't care for is those things. Although I think I have to hit this one, yeah. These things. Another one of those few examples of something being like, oh, well, that's technically pretty cool. It looks cool, but there's absolutely no gameplay to it. Although that one is at least very quick, very fast. It does seem like it's something that, like, you sort of learn the level design and you evade them. So I guess it's not that bad. Oh no, I got hit. This boss becomes much, much more annoying when it shows up in Sonic Mania, because of the fact that you don't have the insta-shield. Although honestly, it's so easy to get hit by this one that I usually do just cheese it. Just let myself get hit just so I can hit it again. Although if you stand on these platforms, that beam doesn't hurt you. I don't know why, but whatever. Maybe that's something that that Neo can talk about in that blog, which is linked in the description once again. Tengu Gemini says, a shame about the final boss in Generations. A shame about most of the bosses in Generations. What's really interesting to me about Generations, and something that again definitely going to be in the episode of it, so spoilers for that, whenever I actually get around to it. Generations, in a lot of ways, carries a lot of the same sort of, like, whoa, they were really crunching at the end to get this one out the door on time. It has a lot of those elements in the same way that a lot of Sonic games do, honestly. Where it's like they were good, they were determined, they had to get it done by holiday 2011 to hit Sonic's 20th anniversary and to hit the holiday deadline. And as a result, some aspects of it suffer. But in comparison to something like Sonic 06, for instance, which was infamously just a rushed, buggy mess of a game, even aside from the things that were wrong with the plot, but we'll get to that. In Generations, it seemed like the team was able to prioritize the things that were actually most important to it being a fun video game. So, and that primarily comes down to the way that Sonic handles, the physics, and the level design. So, while the story is very much like a missed opportunity in Generations, and while the bosses have this sort of unfinished quality to them for the most part, the core of it is very, very, very strong, in my opinion. So it's good that at least they were able to to get that down, to the point that honestly, Generations, ever since it came out, has been my second favorite Sonic game. Like, that's how much I like Generations. And at this point, Sonic Mania has probably taken that spot, but I'm sure it also helps that in terms of like what I like in video games, story isn't really high up on the list. Which is not to say I don't appreciate it or I don't care about it or I hate games that have stories, but I can forgive a good game with a bad plot really easily. Missed potential, the video game. Yeah, that's not... There is tons of missed potential in Generations. Like, when we found out what the plot was, everybody was talking about how fun it was going to be to see, like, these characters interact, or, like, surprise characters that might make cameos or show up. And it's all just very, very, very one note. Like, there's just this big white space and we're going to have little conversations here. There's not a lot of heart in the story at all. Problem with Generations, it's about Sonic's past and present, and they hired people ignorant of Sonic's past to write it. Yeah, I guess that's a good way of putting it. Like, you play Sonic Mania, and one of the things that's so thrilling about that game, for me as a longtime Sonic fan, is just that you can tell how much passion and how much... Let me put it like this. On the stream where Sonic Mania's credits were rolling for the first time after I beat it, I said something like that it was pure joy in video game form. That it was unbridled joy. And what I thought was interesting over the next couple of weeks as I watched other people's takes on Sonic Mania is that they also use that word. Like, joy seemed to be a very common word that people would use to describe Sonic Mania, and that's because, like, the people making it were making exactly what they wanted to make. They were making their dream game, essentially. And because of that, because they grew up loving the same things that I loved, they were able to very accurately predict and implement things that would give me that same feeling. Like, that's what's so freaking amazing about Sonic Mania to me. And, you know, a lot of that does go for Generations as well. Like, seeing these stages that I've played through so many times in, like, a modern setting, or in 3D, or with, like, a remix, and, like, being able to recognize, like, set pieces and stuff like that, it did give me an extremely similar feeling. Though, in terms of its story and really as an overall product, Generations certainly didn't have that anywhere near to the degree that, that Mania does. Pokemologist says you can spin into those? Fucking hell, I never knew that. Spin into what exactly? Are you talking about the fingers that I just beat, or the... Oh no, you were probably talking about those, the spike-topped robots beforehand. I could have beat him right there. Chose to play it safe. I remember when this boss was hard. I was about to say, how on earth did you do that? Yeah, using the spin dash on the first phase of this boss is another one of those things that came from the Sonic & Knuckles strategy guide. Just stand in the middle and spin dash them. I don't know, kind of going back to what somebody asked earlier about what my influences were. Like other YouTubers. But honestly, another thing that probably influenced me was just... I remember when I was a kid, I read a lot of video game magazines and strategy guides especially, and a lot of them were like unlicensed, and so they had sort of a personal bent on things. Like, I remember I had this Donkey Kong Country book where the author would provide his insights and analysis and kind of his own personal take on each level of the game before he would then go into like screenshots and strategies for it. And that was probably another really big, like, very early influence on sort of the approach I take to making this show. But alright, that's it for Sonic & Knuckles. That's... It took me about 40 to 50 minutes to beat Knuckles and an hour to beat this. So that's pretty good. SideQuest Gamer Review Show says, I never bought strategy guides like a pleb. Well, for one, I was a kid and I probably needed the help. For two, the internet was barely a thing. I don't think GameFAQs had even started up when I started buying strategy guides. Doomsday Zone. Oh, wait. Yeah, I'll play Doomsday Zone. I know the level select code. I can do that. How pissed would you have been if there was a Sonic 4 level in Mania? I wouldn't have been pissed at all, but boy, there are people who would have been. If there'd been a Sonic 4 level in Mania, I would have thought it was hilarious. The stream is not ending right now, but it's ending pretty soon. Soon being a relative term, I don't have any idea how long this is gonna last. Oh, whoops. Nobody saw that. Let's see. Oh, did the stream end? Oh no, you guys are just joking about that thing coming up. I never use the level select code like a pleb. I play the game. Honestly, if Sonic Mania had like a little section, maybe it's part of a cutscene that references Sonic 4 and has like the duck sense, I think that would have fit right in with everything else about the game. What was your reaction when you first played Doomsday Zone? I don't think I actually remember the first time I played Doomsday Zone. I remember the first time I got to Sonic 2's Death Egg Zone really well, but the thing about Sonic 3 was that, like, I had a Game Genie by this point, so I could kind of cheese my way around the game to make up for my own lack of skill. And that's probably why it doesn't stick with it. Like, I don't have quite as vivid memories of it, of playing it for the first time anyway, as I do Sonic 2. A Sonic 4 level trolley would have... a Sonic 4 level would have been as trolly as the moving signpost. That moving signpost was excellent. What would you expect out of a new Donkey Kong Country for the Nintendo Switch? Again, I'll recommend that you guys listen to the episode of the Conversation podcast that I was on, where we talk about what a hypothetical Donkey Kong Country game that sort of takes the same approach as Sonic Mania did might look like. Ideally, I would probably want that. More realistically, I would just want either Retro Studios or Monster Games to make a third Donkey Kong Country Returns trilogy, to actually make that a trilogy. But I would also be perfectly okay, equally okay, with if it turns out that Retro's secret project has been a new take on 3D Donkey Kong. I saw King K say something and I have to scroll up to, to get to it. I'll just put this on for a little bit. There it is. He said, Sonic 3 is fantastic, but I do think it's a tad overrated. Maybe, not to put anyone down for liking it, of course. Well, I don't know if you know my feelings on the term overrated in general, but I really don't like using that term to describe video games. That being said, if you didn't... like I was saying a lot earlier that it's difficult for me to judge stuff like this. It's always going to be difficult to fairly judge the things that you grew up loving. Let's put it like that. So, for those of you who don't know, King K is like 10 years younger than I am, so of course there's no way he could have grown up with this. So, given from like a completely different like frame of reference on video games, I can see that I can see you having a different take on it. Main Memory said Mania should have had a Sonic 3D level. That would have been great. You ever played Sonic Robo Blast 2? Yes, I have. I've actually been following... I followed the development of that game going back to like 2002 or something. Blabler asks if I'll be their friend, and yeah, sure, I'll be your friend. The clouds in the very back have a messed up parallax scroll, do they? Or do you mean... Okay, you mean in the ending. Well, let me put it like this. If the people who claim that Sonic 3 and Knuckles was, like, that nothing anywhere close to being as fun or as good as Sonic 3 and Knuckles has come out since Sonic 3 and Knuckles, that I disagree with. I think that there have been perfectly fun, perfectly solid, perfectly good Sonic games since Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It's sort of similar to how the next generation would say that, like, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle was the last good Sonic game. Like, that, in my opinion, is, like, oversimplifying and overstating the trajectory that the Sonic series followed. Like, I don't think there was ever a point where it just crashed into being nothing but crappy games. I think that there's always been a mix of good Sonic games and bad Sonic games. It's never been a series that maintained the quality like something that like Metroid did, where pretty much every game in the series, to a point, was very much worth playing and worth your time. Just go in here, like Knuckles Chaotix wasn't very good. That was an early Sonic game. Sonic Blast wasn't very good. The Sonic Drift games were strange. Sonic Labyrinth even more so. So, like, I don't think there was ever a point that the Sonic series, like, totally crashed in quality and never recovered from it. I think that even in the wake of Sonic 06, like, I remember really, really enjoying Sonic and the Secret Rings. Mind you, that the way that game handles its tutorial and how freaking slow it is early on until you start upgrading your rings is ridiculous. But there's always been something in the Sonic series that I've enjoyed. So I guess that's that's sort of my piece on it. People are pointing out that the Mortal Kombat theme is playing. Yeah, this menu will actually play a bunch of different music at random. Like now it's playing something from Mean Bean Machine. Somebody asked what my reaction was to Mania's Chemical Plant Boss. I'll link it in the chat right now. Because I actually streamed my whole first playthrough of Sonic Mania. I apologize if in this playthrough I get very loud and I can't stop screaming and giggling deliriously whenever fun things happen. But that's pretty much where I was. There it is. This video is unlisted just because it doesn't really match my normal content. But there you go. Main Memory says, wait, someone else who actually likes Secret Rings? Yeah, Secret Rings was excellent. I think that to really appreciate it, though, most of the people who really appreciate it are the people who were, like, early adopters for the Wii, so they didn't have a whole lot to play, so they were forced to engage with it and get good at it. King Raiko wants to know what conversation I was on. I've been on 3 episodes. One was about the Nintendo Switch, and they've all been within the past year. One was about the Nintendo Switch first impressions, one was about World 5 of Yooka-Laylee, and the third was primarily about Sonic Mania. Desert Demolition! Yeah. Yeah, I recently got something called a Retrode, which lets you connect Genesis and Super Nintendo carts to your computer via USB. Like, it has cartridge slots for both of them. So, the biggest reason I decided to revamp this stuff is these are actually, with the exception of the ROM hacks, of course, these are dumps off of my own cartridges. Which I know, intellectually speaking, that, you know, it's the exact same code, but there's something that makes it feel a little bit more authentic and a little bit more special to me about that. Pokemologist says their first Sonic game was Adventure, and he still has a Dreamcast hooked up. Yep, so do I. Somebody said, have you listened to Mortal Kombat? No, I haven't. Does your Raspberry Pi have a full ROM set? No, there's no point in me doing that, I don't feel like. Like, there's games I want to play. there's games I'm going to be interested in playing, but the bulk of them are things that I never touch anyway. So I don't consider it a big deal. Sonic 3 with 1 and 2 sprites. Yeah, let's look at that real quick. So this is Sonic 3 complete with like the standard sprites. This is Sonic 3 complete with Sonic 2 sprites. This is something that the Sonic 3 complete like loader program customizer, that's what it's called. It's one of the options that lets you set. Somebody says, is that a modified SNES Classic Mini or some Raspberry Pi distro? This is a Raspberry Pi. Running RetroPie with a customized, like the menu theme is based on the Super Nintendo Classics set. And I like the sprites in Sonic 3 just fine, but I like the ones in Sonic 2 just a little bit better. Sonic just looks a little bit more on model than that sort of a little bit more chubby, rounded look that they were going with. Whoa, okay, I thought I was going to pull that off. The little chubby, more rounded look that they were going with the early 3D models at the time. Page Master? Yeah, unfortunately, I have a real cartridge of Page Master. It's not a very good game at all. Argument there. You guys are arguing about Secret Rings. Yeah, man, it's a game that just starts out so freaking slowly. Like, I don't even remember how long I had to put into it before it actually started getting really fun. But yeah, what King K said, I can understand the hate for it. Yeah, I don't mind the Sonic 3 sprite at all either. Anyway, my throat hurts a little bit, and I really need to go hopefully try to finish Other M. If I can stop taking super detailed notes about it. So, I think I'm going to call it a night. This is something, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Streaming with this sort of a little bit more of a... Sometimes when I've streamed in the past, it's sort of been more of a match for what you typically associate with a stream. That is, like, I've had other people on the chat, I've had other people, like, in a call, or I've just had, like, friends over. And so the focus has been a little bit more on, like, making jokes and entertainment or something like that. Streaming like this, at least what I've tried to do with this, is a little bit more in line with my typical style of content. That is, it's been a little bit more like, a little bit more focused on the games, and a little bit more analytical, and a little bit less, oh my god, look at that lava reef zone! And this is something, like, streaming like this is something that I'd like to make more of a regular thing, if you guys would be interested in that. And somebody pointed out that Bridge Zone music was playing, and yes, of course it was. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I just like, throw some thoughts at me on Twitter about what I could do to improve, or what you thought of it. Yeah, the Super NES Classic theme for Pi, by the way, I think is something that you have to download specifically. Like, you can't download it through the menu right now, through the ES Themes thing. But yeah, Raspberry Pi. I have way too much fun with this thing. Anyway, I'm gonna sign off now. Thank you guys for joining me. This went a little bit longer than I was expecting it to, but I've had a good time. I'll end with the catchphrase as I always do. Until next time, you keep geeking, I'll keep critiquing.